Hello and welcome to our first revision video for a little while. Thank you to all of you who have been complaining that I haven't done one. It was really nice of you to say that, as odd as a complaint sounds. Obviously with mocks and half term we've not been here for a while, so let's go straight into what we've been doing. In year 9 we've been looking at social stratification, putting people into groups, and we've looked at the census and why governments take censuses and what they tell us and how we measure the population through official documents like the census, and then lots of different people will draw data from that. The government will draw data from that and reflect on how the population has changed, how it might change, what's going on. And obviously we can apply all sorts of things from cages there to look at the population in Britain. So remember, this is the key mechanism, and also you can link it to your research methods, your practical and your ethical considerations, and what it means in terms of how we carry out research in society. Looking at social groups, we looked at in-groups and out-groups. This is a really nice little distinction, some good keywords to put into work as well to help you explain whether you're talking about certain groups of people in society. So an in-group is a group that an individual feels they belong to, essentially, and is a big part of who they are. So it might be a group such as a football team that you support, for example, and it defines your identity perhaps. An out-group is a group someone doesn't belong to, often feels negatively or in competition to. So you might have a gender split and the in-group is your gender and the out-group is the opposite gender, for example, at school. So it's not really a list of one thing or another, because it's entirely negotiated. It's entirely up to you how you perceive an in and out group. We've also been debating what exactly decides our status in society, and we looked at all the different factors. A lot of people have said it was simply money, but there's other ways of thinking about this, and particularly how money is linked to the rest of them. So your popularity or fame, where you live, the type of house you live in, the jobs that you have, your family has or have had, what type of family you belong to, the education level that you're at, and all these other measures. And a lot of people, the more we talked about it, seemed to feel that actually it's the interaction between these which was really key. And there was examples for and against all of these categories, which was really interesting. So you can list your own examples and you come up with your own reasons for and against, but make sure you examine them in relation to each other. Life chances is a fairly obvious key term, really. The clue's in the name. We looked at life chances in terms of Marx and Weber. So Marx entirely down to class and material wealth. Essentially, you're either proletariat or bourgeoisie, and there's very little wiggle room there, very little change, because of the exploitation and the class conflict that Marx saw. Weber comes along later and says, well, it depends on social mobility and inequality. It depends on who you are, where you start off with, and how much potential you have to move, and that it's not equal for everyone. So although it may sound like they believe the same things, actually Weber once again is coming along later and giving a more subtle or nuanced version of what Marx is saying, in my opinion. But essentially what you want to think about when it comes to life chances is, what are you born into, what opportunities do you have, and how does changes over time affect those opportunities, such as health, such as cages, and what goes on in society. So it links very much to social mobility as well in some respects. Social mobility then, we looked at the examples of Meghan Markle and Bugsy Malone. You guys obviously know far more about Bugsy Malone than I do, and probably Meghan Markle as well. But we looked at how social mobility, often we think of it as going up in society, and these are two people that have gone up quite a lot and have done that for various different reasons and very different stories. But also remember, social mobility is moving down too, potentially. So for all of the success stories, if you like, all of the kind of fairy tale outcomes that we often associate with social mobility, it could be loss of high status into low status too. So again, use case studies, use examples that are simple and easy for you to remember, but just don't lose sight of the fact it's not just an upward trajectory. Social mobility is up or down. It's movement between the two classes, really. There are three types of poverty which you need to know about. The first two are possibly the most important, but the third one is really good if you can use it. So absolute poverty is essentially having nothing, or it's having a lack of everything. So shelter, food, money, resources. Relative poverty is, as the name implies, relative to your society. So you can be relatively poor compared to everyone else around you. And that's the same with relative wealth, really. You might have a lot of money in your country, but move to a country that's a lot richer, and although the amount of money you have stays the same, relatively speaking, you're not as rich as everyone else, or vice versa. Income poverty is how the government looks at your household income, the incomes of everyone else in the country and those around you, and whether or not you can meet the needs of your family. So you may earn the same as someone else in your street, but they may have no kids, no husband or wife, they might live on their own, whereas you've got a spouse and you've got several kids to feed. So income poverty, although you earn the same amount, it might be to do with that, and it's similar to relative poverty. If you can start to differentiate between types of poverty in your work, that will help obviously boost your grades, but it will help give you much more detail and a much better understanding of key issues. In year 10, we've been looking at education and essentially been given a lot of model answers. You were given model answers with a couple of key terms and their definitions underneath, and you went through, you bugged those, you went through the structure, you compared them to your work, you red penned them, you went through and you saw essentially how for 3 marks you need point, evidence, explain. You add a link for 4 marks, generally speaking, and then you combine those structures in your essays to compare different viewpoints, and that really leads to good exam success. I've been marking mocks, obviously, and you can tell the difference. The grade 9 student or the grade 7 to 9 students, they're doing this regularly, and that comparison between views is an easy way to gain marks. And if you think about a paper that's 22 questions, only 4 of those are multiple choice, so you've got 18 marks, 1 per question, 18 marks, that's 2 grades generally speaking. So doing this and practicing this is a really useful way for those of you that struggle to get more than 1 out of 3 or 2 out of 4, and you want to just tip it into that extra grade boundary, that extra balance. I've done other videos on this specifically, so look those up or come and see me if you need help with kind of squeezing extra marks out of your exam papers. These are the exam questions we've been looking at in education, and you've had a go at answering these. Remember the study cards that I've made. I'll make those available for you on the Google Classroom as well. Have those to hand if you want to practice exam questions at home, particularly your essays or your source questions. They're really, really useful for that. So we looked at parentocracy and ideas around the new right and functionalism and parents' involvement being different amongst the classes when it comes to education. We looked at how educational success can be measured. The obvious answer is exam results, and then we talked about Ofsted and the role of Ofsted and how they look at more than just that. So things like value added, the well-being, and other ways in which the school can meet the needs of its pupils. Again, parents' values and attitudes and education achievement, linking back to parentocracy there, so there's massive overlap with these questions. Marketization, again, is another key word you want to look at. So notice how the questions you've been doing, they're very similar, and they're asking for very similar things, and it's that skill of reading the question which really defines how well you do. And then this essay question is a brilliant essay question, whether or not education is meritocratic. So you've got the consensus of functionalism versus the conflict of Marxists and feminism, and the studies of people like Paul Willis, for example, or the idea of the glass ceiling or gender pay gap after education is good comparisons to use. This is something that you've all done very well. One of the key contrasts in this module is homeschooling and deschooling. So think about what that is and why some people might do that. Obviously, it's still very much a minority phenomena, if you like, in society, but it makes such a nice contrast. So familiarise yourself with the functionalist and Marxist view here, and why homeschooling is something you will need to talk about in the exam. The feminization of education. and the idea that essentially education takes over a maternal role, and functionalists will talk about the bridge, whereas feminists will talk about the expectations on females is something that you want to look at. Again, it's a good comparison with Willis, so think about subject choice as well for a good example, and conformity, bedroom culture, same issues that we've talked about before. Just to hammer the point home, social mobility can be a key idea as well, specifically in education. And obviously education as a vehicle of social mobility, how well you do at school, how well you do at university, defines where you move to in society. So the different views on that are something you want to think about here. Vocational education, subjects to do more with job skills and preparing you for a specific job, kind of shows again this link back to the tripartite system and the working class being funneled, if you like, into something that would keep them in their class, as Marxists might say, or be gendered, as feminists would say. So think about what vocational education actually is. Think about the stereotypes around it, the different subjects connected to it, and what your viewpoint is, and whether or not you agree with certain sociologists or not. In year 11, we've done a mock on a paper 2, so crime and deviance and social stratification. We've been looking at the underclass, so the sense that at the bottom of the pyramid there's a whole group of people which are completely detached and left behind from society, and this links in with year 9 too. Obviously we're looking at Charles Murray here, we're looking at the New Right, and we're looking at how we stereotype and stigmatise the poorest in society and what that means. So we're linking this into welfare. You may remember the video on chavs that we watched as well, and talked around discussions around labelling too. So the underclass is a really key concept because obviously it builds on Marxism and it allows you to explore lots of different very contradictory viewpoints almost and give your own opinion on class. We then looked at globalization and whether it's positive or negative. We focused on whether American culture as well as American brands and American capitalism was taking over the world. We talked about the emergence of the Chinese with Huawei and different brands like that rivaling Apple, and we looked at how in the last 20 years brands that perhaps you guys have never heard of or never used have emerged or have disappeared and been replaced by other ones. And some things that can really show us how technology has taken over or changed and developed, and this is due to globalization. We looked at food and fashion, and as well as your smartphones. So globalization, again, bringing back to Marxism and the ideas around class conflict and global capitalism versus global communism. We looked at how technology has changed how we see things and whether or not we're influenced by American culture. And you all had different views and different experiences of this, so it was really a good way to show that. Finally, we came back to welfare as a specific issue. So we looked at this tragic story from a while back of the Philpott family where the children were killed in a fire, and it was actually linked to a crime, but that crime was portrayed in the media as a clear link to welfare and the welfare use of the family and the father particularly. And we talked about the stigma and stereotyping of people who claim welfare in the media, and we looked at the story of a woman in a mobility scooter and ideas of deserving poor versus undeserving poor perhaps, and we looked at different perspectives, political perspectives on welfare and why it's such an important issue. And obviously with the election coming up right now, it's a huge newspaper story every day. Who's going to spend what, who's going to tax who, what it's going to cost, what we're going to do. And remember, welfare isn't just benefits, it isn't just job seekers or the dole. You've got pensions, you've got the NHS, you've got housing benefits, you've got lots of different payments, and they're not just for people who don't work. So be very, very careful not to fall into your own trap of stigmatizing and stereotyping when you talk about it. I appreciate it's been a bit of a gap and it's been a much longer video than usual. I hope it's been helpful, and we'll see you again soon.